My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 26 years old. For most of my life, I believed my dad was unshakable. He was the kind of man who carried himself with quiet confidence, always neatly dressed in his pressed shirts, the kind of father who'd say, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," and you just believed him. That night, though, I saw something in him I never expected: fear. We were sitting at a nice Italian restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and dim candlelight flickering on polished silverware. It wasn't a place we went often. Too fancy, too expensive, but Dad had insisted. He said he wanted to celebrate me getting a promotion at work. I was touched. He'd always told me hard work pays off, and that night he said he wanted to treat me. Mom was there too, looking sharp in her navy dress, her hair pinned back in a way that made her look younger. She was in a good mood, laughing louder than usual, sipping her wine like it was water. For once, everything felt almost normal. We ordered appetizers, pasta, and wine. The conversation flowed easily at first. Dad asked about my new role. Mom chimed in with stories about her own early jobs. For a little while, I thought maybe this was what family was supposed to feel like. And then the waiter returned with the check. I'll never forget the way he leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, your card was declined." The world seemed to pause. Dad froze, his hand still on the leather billfold. His face drained of all color, his jaw tightening as he fumbled for his wallet. Mom's smile faltered, her eyes darting to me and then back to him. "What do you mean?" Dad asked, his voice low and strained. "I tried it twice," the waiter said gently. "It didn't go through." Dad cleared his throat, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Try this one," he muttered, handing over another card. His hands were shaking. I sat there, my stomach twisting. I'd never seen him like that. My dad, the man who always had everything under control, was unraveling in front of me. Mom's face turned red. She leaned toward him, her voice sharp. "What's going on, Tom?" "Nothing," he snapped quickly, his eyes avoiding hers. "It's probably just a mix-up." But it wasn't. The waiter returned, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, sir. This one was declined too." I wanted to disappear into the floor. People at nearby tables were glancing over, whispering. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. Dad shoved the card back into his wallet and pulled out a third one. This time, he slammed it down harder than necessary. "Run this," he barked. The waiter nodded quickly and hurried away. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom's eyes narrowed. "Tom, what the hell is going on? Why don't you have money on any of those cards?" Dad didn't answer. He just stared at the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, my own heart racing. I reached into my purse, pulling out my debit card. "It's okay, I'll get it," I said quickly, my voice trembling. Dad's head snapped up.
"No."
"Dad." I said no. His voice was harsh, louder than it should have been. A few heads turned. The waiter returned then, setting down the bill. "This one worked," he said softly before slipping away again. Dad let out a shaky breath, but the damage was done. The celebration was ruined. The ride home was silent. Mom stared out the window, her arms crossed tight against her chest. Dad gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding him together. I sat in the back seat, my thoughts racing. When we got home, Mom went straight upstairs without a word. Dad stayed in the kitchen, pacing. I hovered in the doorway, unsure if I should say something. Finally, I whispered, "Dad, are you okay?" He turned to me, his face pale and tired. For a second, I thought he might open up, but then he forced a weak smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." But I wasn't a child anymore. I knew when something wasn't fine. I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but I could feel it. That dinner wasn't just about a declined card. It was a crack in the image I had of my dad, a crack that would only grow wider the more I looked. And deep down, I had a feeling the truth was going to hurt more than I was ready for. The morning after the dinner, the house felt heavier than usual. I came down to the smell of coffee, but instead of the warm, comforting aroma that usually meant Dad was already in the kitchen humming to himself. This one felt sharp and bitter. Mom was at the table, her fingers drumming impatiently against the wood. Dad sat across from her, his eyes on the folded newspaper, but not really reading it. The silence was thick, like storm clouds pressed against the ceiling. When I stepped in, Mom's gaze flicked to me, then back to Dad.
"Tell her," she snapped.
Dad didn't look up. "Not now, Carol." "Not now," she hissed.
"When?"
"When the bank comes knocking. When we lose the house." My heart lurched. Lose the house. Dad finally looked up, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. "It's not what it sounds like." Mom slammed her hand against the table, rattling the coffee mugs. "Don't lie to her, Tom. She's not a child anymore." I stood frozen, clutching the back of a chair. "What's going on?" Dad rubbed his temples, sighing heavily. "Just money trouble. Nothing we can't handle." But the way his voice cracked told me otherwise. Mom leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Your father has been hiding things. Credit cards maxed out, loans I didn't even know about. That little scene at the restaurant? That was just the tip of the iceberg." I looked at Dad, my stomach twisting. "Is that true?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm figuring it out. You don't need to worry." But I did worry. Because for the first time in my life, my father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who worked overtime to buy me school supplies, who always said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I've got this," looked powerless. The rest of the day, I couldn't focus. I sat in my room, staring at the walls, trying to make sense of what Mom had said. Maxed out credit cards. Loans. The house at risk. How had it gotten this bad, without me noticing? That night, I heard them arguing downstairs. "You should have told me months ago." Mom's voice cracked with fury. "I didn't want to worry you," Dad muttered. "Worry me?" she snapped. "Tom, you're drowning us, and you wanted to keep it a secret? Do you know how humiliating it was sitting there at that restaurant while the waiter told us your card was declined?" His voice was quieter, almost pleading. "I'll fix it, Carol. Just give me time." Her reply cut through the walls like a knife. "Time isn't going to fix lies." I pulled the covers over my head, pressing my hands to my ears, but the words seeped in anyway.
Lies. Debt.
Humiliation. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate. My coworkers congratulated me again on the promotion, but all I could think about was that restaurant, the way Dad's face had gone pale, the way Mom's voice had trembled with anger. That evening, I decided to confront him. I found him in the garage, sitting on a folding chair with his head in his hands. The smell of oil and sawdust clung to the air.
"Dad,"
I whispered. He looked up quickly, forcing a smile. "Hey, sweetheart. What's up?" I stepped closer, my arms crossed. "Mom told me about the debt. The cards. The loans."
"Why didn't you tell me?"
His smile faltered. He leaned back, sighing. "Because you don't need to carry this burden, Emily. You're young. You're starting your life. You shouldn't be weighed down by my mistakes." I swallowed hard. But I am weighed down. Because it's not just your life. It's ours. It's the house, it's Mom, it's me. His hazel eyes, so much like mine, met mine, and for the first time, I saw shame in them. "I wanted to protect you." I shook my head. "By lying?" The words hung in the air like smoke. He didn't answer. In the days that followed, the cracks grew deeper. Dad started coming home later, his excuses flimsy. Over time, he'd say, but when I asked what job he was working, he'd change the subject. Mom stopped cooking dinners, her frustration simmering in cold leftovers and silence at the table. One Saturday afternoon, I came home from running errands and found a letter on the kitchen counter. The envelope was from the bank. My stomach dropped as I opened it. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings will begin if payment is not made within 30 days. My hands shook as I read the words. Foreclosure. We could lose everything. When Dad walked in a few minutes later, whistling like nothing was wrong, I held up the letter. "What is this?" His smile vanished. "Emily, where did you get that?" "It was on the counter," I snapped. "Are we about to lose the house?" He snatched the letter from my hands, his jaw clenched. "I'm handling it. You're not handling it. I cried, my voice breaking. You're hiding it. Do you know what it feels like, watching everything fall apart and not being told the truth? He flinched at my words, his shoulders sagging. For a moment, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. I never wanted you to see me like this. Tears stung my eyes. I'd rather see the truth than live in lies. He turned away, his voice barely audible. Sometimes lies are easier. That night, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, the foreclosure notice replaying in my mind. My dad, the man who had always been my rock, was crumbling, and he was dragging us down with him. And the worst part? I couldn't tell if he was hiding just financial problems, or if there was more beneath the surface. Something darker. Because when a man builds his life on secrets, you never know how deep they go. When you grow up believing your dad is a pillar, it's disorienting to watch him crumble. Every time I saw him after that night at the restaurant, he looked older, like the years had caught up to him all at once. His shoulders hunched, his hair seemed grayer, and his eyes wouldn't meet mine the way they used to. The foreclosure notice haunted me. I couldn't stop picturing our home, my childhood bedroom, the creaky staircase, the lilac bush Dad had planted when I was 10, being ripped away. I knew he was hiding things, but what? How had it gotten this bad? One afternoon, I decided I couldn't sit in the dark anymore. If he wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. Mom was out shopping, Dad was at work, and I went into his office. It was a small room tucked behind the living room, more storage than anything else. His desk was cluttered with bills, receipts, and unopened envelopes. My hands shook as I began sorting through them. The more I read, the sicker I felt. Credit card statements with balances that made my stomach lurch, 5 figures, 6 in some cases. Loans taken out from multiple banks. And then, in a folder shoved into the back of a drawer, documents that made me sit down hard in his chair. He'd taken out a second mortgage. Without telling Mom. Without telling anyone. I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting nausea. That explained the foreclosure threat.
But why?
Where had all the money gone? I flipped through more papers, searching for answers. That's when I found it. Receipts from casinos. Thousands of dollars in withdrawals. Airline tickets to Las Vegas. Hotel bookings. My stomach dropped. Dad wasn't just drowning in debt. He was gambling. I leaned back in his chair, my head spinning. All those late nights, all those excuses about working overtime, they weren't about work at all. He'd been chasing luck at poker tables and slot machines while our house slipped toward foreclosure. I felt hot tears sting my eyes. Betrayal isn't always someone walking out on you. Sometimes it's watching the person you trust most choose everything else over you. When Dad came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, the folder clutched in my hands. "Emily," he said, startled, setting down his jacket. "What are you doing with that?" "Don't," I snapped, my voice shaking. "Don't lie to me again." His eyes flickered to the folder, then back to me. "It's not what you think." "Oh, really?" I threw the papers onto the coffee table. "Because it looks exactly like what I think. You've been gambling, haven't you? That's where all the money went." He opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed heavily. "I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed." "Fix it?" My voice cracked. "You've put us at risk of losing everything. Do you realize what you've done to Mom?"
To me?
"Emily." "No." I cut him off, tears streaming down my face. "You were supposed to protect us. You were supposed to be the one we could count on. Instead, you've been sneaking off to casinos while lying to our faces." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked truly broken. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." I laughed bitterly. "That's the thing about bad decisions, Dad. You don't mean them until they ruin everything." The air between us was thick with pain. I wanted him to fight back, to argue, to give me something other than silence. But he just sat there, his hands limp on his knees, staring at the floor. That night, I couldn't stay in the house. I drove to my friend Sarah's apartment and sat on her couch until 2 a.m., spilling everything. She listened quietly, her hand on mine. "Emily, this isn't just money. This is betrayal." I nodded, my throat tight. I don't even know who he is anymore. When I finally went home, the house was dark. I passed Dad's office on my way upstairs and saw him through the cracked door. He was sitting at his desk, head in his hands, the folder I'd thrown now spread open in front of him. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of pity.
He looked so small, so lost.
But then I remembered the foreclosure notice, the casino receipts, the lies, and the pity turned to anger. The next morning, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You went through his office." I froze. "You knew?" She looked away, her arms crossed. I suspected. The late nights, the trips, the missing money. I just didn't want to admit it. I stared at her, stunned. "Why didn't you stop him?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. And because I was afraid." Her confession hit me hard. We were both living under the weight of his secrets, both trapped in silence. That day, I started keeping my distance. I ate dinners alone in my room, avoided conversations, stayed late at work. I couldn't look at him without seeing the betrayal etched into his face. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the truth was undeniable. We were on the brink of losing everything. And Dad was the reason. The morning after I confronted Dad, the house felt like a battlefield where the fighting had stopped but the smoke still lingered. No one spoke at breakfast. Dad sipped his coffee like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth, while Mom sat stiffly at the other end of the table, her fork scraping against her plate with sharp, angry clicks. I sat in the middle, my chest tight, my mind racing. Every sound seemed louder than usual, every silence deeper. Finally, Mom slammed her fork down and stood. "Enough," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't go on like this, Tom." Dad didn't look up. "Carol." "No," she snapped, her face red. "Don't Carol me. You've been lying to us for years."
"Years, Tom."
"Do you know how humiliating that dinner was? Sitting there while your card was declined in front of our daughter." He winced but didn't speak. "And now," she continued, tears brimming in her eyes, "I find out the house we built together, is hanging by a thread because you can't keep yourself out of casinos." Dad's face was pale, his hands shaking. "I thought I could fix it." Mom laughed bitterly, a sound that cut through the room. "Fix it? You can't even admit you have a problem." The words hung in the air like smoke. My stomach churned. I wanted to scream, to tell them both to stop, but the truth was I needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly how deep this wound went. Dad finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I just wanted to provide. To give you both the life you deserved." "By gambling it away?" Mom spat. His shoulders sagged. I thought if I won big, I could pay off the debts. Put everything back in order." Her voice broke. "You're destroying us, Tom." I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the tile. "You already have," I whispered before storming upstairs. In my room, I collapsed on the bed, burying my face in the pillow. My whole body shook with anger and grief. I wanted to hate him, but part of me still loved him. He was my dad. He'd held my hand crossing streets, taught me to tie my shoes, sat through every school recital. How could that man be the same one hiding casino receipts in his desk drawer? That evening, I overheard Mom on the phone with Aunt Linda. Her voice was hushed but urgent. "I don't know what to do. If the bank takes the house, where will we go? Emily just got her promotion. She shouldn't have to deal with this." My chest tightened. I wasn't supposed to hear that, but I did. And it made everything feel even heavier. The next day, I cornered Dad in the garage again. He was sitting on that same folding chair, staring at the concrete floor. "Dad," I said, my voice low but firm, "you need to get help." He looked up, startled. "What?" "You have a gambling problem. It's not just money, it's an addiction. And if you don't get help, you're going to lose everything."
"Mom, me."
"The house. All of it." His eyes filled with tears, something I'd never seen before. "Emily, I don't know how to stop." I swallowed hard. "Then you need to find someone who does." He rubbed his face, groaning. Your mom already hates me. She doesn't hate you, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. She's hurt.
So am I.
But if you keep lying, if you keep gambling, then yes, you'll lose us. For the first time, he nodded slowly, like the words had pierced through the fog. Maybe you're right, but I wasn't sure if he believed it. That weekend, things exploded again. Mom found another withdrawal slip from the bank in his pocket while doing laundry. Tom, she shouted, slamming the slip onto the kitchen counter. You told us you stopped. You told us you were done. I rushed in from the living room, my heart pounding. Dad, please tell me you didn't. His face was gray, his lips trembling. It was just once. I needed to try and win something back. Win something back? Mom's voice was shrill. You've gambled away our future. There's nothing left to win back. I stood there, frozen, as Mom's chest heaved and Dad collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of Mom crying in the guest room. The sound was muffled, but it sliced through me like a blade. I realized then that it wasn't just about money. It was about trust. And once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to put back together. Over the next few days, I kept my distance from Dad. I buried myself in work, stayed late at the office, anything to avoid the suffocating tension at home. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. The cracks were too deep. One evening, I came home and found Mom sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. Divorce forms. My breath caught. Mom, are you serious? She looked up, her eyes red and tired. I can't live like this anymore, Emily. I can't spend the rest of my life waiting for the next lie, the next crisis. I need peace. Tears blurred my vision.
What about me?
What about us as a family? Her voice softened. I love you, and I'll always be here for you. But sometimes, love isn't enough to fix what's broken. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, my world tilting beneath my feet. Later that night, I confronted Dad again. She's filing for divorce, I told him, my voice breaking. He looked at me with hollow eyes. I deserve it. I shook my head, tears streaming. No, Dad. You don't deserve it. You chose it. Every time you lied, every time you walked into a casino, every time you put the cards above us, you chose this. He flinched, his face crumpling. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I whispered. And you still are. I turned and walked away, leaving him in the dark kitchen. For the first time, I didn't feel like his daughter. I felt like his victim. The night Mom laid those divorce papers on the table, something inside Dad seemed to snap. He didn't rage. He didn't beg. He just sat there, staring at the forms like they were written in another language, his face slack and unreadable. Mom went upstairs, the papers left in a neat stack between us. I stood there, torn between wanting to comfort him and wanting to scream at him. In the end, I did neither. I just went to bed, though sleep never came. The next few days were unbearable. Mom barely spoke to Dad, moving around him like he was a shadow in the house. Dad spent most of his time in the garage or his office, doors closed. I stayed out as much as I could, but the silence lingered even when I wasn't there. Then came the night everything changed. I was in my room when I heard the front door slam. Heavy footsteps pounded through the hallway, and then Mom's voice cut the silence. Where were you? She demanded. Out, Dad muttered. Out where? Another casino? Another loan shark? Carol, stop. His voice cracked. No, Tom, she snapped. I won't stop. You're destroying us, and you don't even care. I crept halfway down the stairs, my heart racing. I do care, he shouted, louder than I'd ever heard him. You think I don't lie awake every night wondering how I let it get this far? You think I don't hate myself for what I've done? Then why do you keep doing it? Mom's voice broke. Why can't you stop? There was silence, heavy and terrible. Then Dad whispered something that froze me where I stood. Because I owe people, Carol. People who don't forgive. Mom gasped. What are you talking about? I borrowed money, Dad said hoarsely. Not just from banks. From people. People who expect it back with interest. And if I don't pay, he trailed off, his voice trembling. Oh my God. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. You put us in danger. I clutched the banister, my chest tight. Danger. Loan sharks. My dad, our protector, had dragged us into something darker than gambling debts. The next morning, I confronted him. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into his untouched coffee. Is it true? I demanded. He looked up, startled. Emily. Is it true, Dad? Did you borrow money from people like that? His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. Do you realize what you've done? My voice shook. You didn't just ruin our finances. You've put us in danger.
Me. Mom.
All of us. Tears filled his eyes. I thought I could win it back before it got this far. That excuse doesn't work anymore, I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. You keep saying you'll fix it, but you're the one breaking everything. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not of us, not of losing the house, but of whoever was on the other end of those debts. That week, strange things started happening. A car idled outside our house late at night, headlights off. I saw the same man standing on the corner more than once, his eyes sharp and watchful. And one evening, when I came home from work, there was an envelope taped to the front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Pay what you owe, or we come inside. My hands shook as I showed it to Mom. Her face went white. Tom, she screamed, shoving the note at him. This is your fault. Dad collapsed into a chair, his hands trembling. I'll handle it. Handle it? Mom cried. You've lost that right. I stood there, my heart pounding, the note crumpling in my fists. For the first time, I was terrified not just of losing our house, but of losing everything. That night, I packed a bag. Emily, what are you doing? Dad asked, his voice hollow. I can't stay here, I said, my throat tight. I can't live in a house where men might show up at any moment to collect on your mistakes. Tears filled his eyes. Please don't leave me. I swallowed hard, my chest aching. You left me a long time ago, Dad. You just didn't walk out the door. I stayed with Sarah for a few weeks, but I couldn't cut ties completely. Mom called every night, her voice strained. He's a mess, Emily. He sits in that garage like a ghost. He says he's trying to figure something out, but I don't know what. Part of me wanted to wash my hands of him, to let him drown in the mess he'd made. But another part of me, the daughter part, still ached for the man who used to tuck me in at night, who built a swing set in the backyard, who believed in me. One evening, Sarah found me crying on her couch. You still love him, she said softly. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. But I don't know if I can ever trust him again.
Trust. That word haunted me.
Because betrayal isn't just about lies, it's about stealing trust.
And Dad had stolen mine.
The next weekend, Mom asked me to come home.
We need to talk, she said. Her voice was flat, drained.
When I walked into the house, the divorce papers were gone. In their place was a single envelope on the kitchen table. Dad pushed it toward me. I sold my truck, he said quietly. And some tools. It's not enough, but it's a start. I stared at the envelope. A start for what? For paying them back, he whispered. Mom crossed her arms. It won't be enough. It'll never be enough. Dad's eyes were wet. I know, but I have to try. I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't the man who'd taught me how to ride a bike or the man who cheered at my graduation. He was a broken version of that man, drowning in his own lies. And I didn't know if he'd ever climb out. When Dad laid that envelope on the kitchen table, it was the first time I'd seen him take real action. But instead of relief, all I felt was dread. Because a man willing to sell his truck and his tools, the things he loved most, was a man backed into a corner. And men in corners don't always make safe choices. Over the next week, the tension in the house only deepened. Mom barely spoke to him, answering his questions with clipped one-word replies. I stayed out as much as possible, not ready to watch my family unravel in slow motion. But every time I walked through the front door, the air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were waiting to collapse. Then came the night that proved just how far gone Dad really was. I came home late from work to find the living room lights still on. Mom sat on the couch, her arms crossed tightly, her face pale and furious. Dad stood in front of her, pacing. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously, setting my purse down. Mom shot me a sharp look, her lips pressed into a thin line.
"Tell her," she demanded.
Dad's eyes darted to mine. They were wild, desperate. "I found a way," he said quickly. "A way for what?" I asked. "To fix it," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "To get the money we need." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Mom's voice cracked as she shouted. "He took out another loan." My stomach dropped. "What?" Dad raised his hands defensively. "It's different this time. It's from a guy I know. He promised he could double it for me at a private game." "Are you insane?" I cried, my voice trembling. "You're in debt up to your neck, and your solution is to borrow more?" "It's the only way," he shouted back. "If I win, I can pay off everything. The house, the cards, all of it." "You won't win," Mom snapped, her eyes glistening with tears. "You never do, Tom. That's the problem." I felt my knees weaken. I sank into a chair, pressing my hands to my face. "Dad, you're going to get yourself killed." He froze at that, his chest heaving. For a moment, I thought maybe my words had gotten through. But then he shook his head. "I can't stop now. If I stop, we lose everything." "No," I whispered, lifting my head. "If you keep going, we lose you." The silence that followed was suffocating. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Dad in some dark back room, cards in his hand, men with cold eyes watching him lose everything again. And this time, I knew it wouldn't just be about money. The next morning, I found Mom at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. She looked hollow. "I can't do this anymore," she said softly. I swallowed hard. "What are you going to do?" She looked up at me with tired eyes. "I'm leaving, Emily. I can't stay here and watch him destroy himself and us." The words sliced through me, but I couldn't argue. She was right. That evening, Dad didn't come home. Mom packed a bag and went to stay with Aunt Linda. I was alone in the house, the silence pressing against my chest like a weight. At midnight, I heard the front door creak open. Dad stumbled in, his shirt wrinkled, his face drawn. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice slurred. I stared at him, my heart pounding.
"She's gone."
She couldn't take it anymore. His face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like a lost child. I just wanted to fix it. Tears burned my eyes. "You can't fix this by gambling, Dad. You're only making it worse." He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I don't know what else to do. I stood there, trembling, torn between fury and pity. "Then admit it," I whispered. "Admit you have a problem. Admit you need help." He didn't answer. The silence was louder than any confession could have been. 2 days later, everything came to a head. I was at work when Mom called, her voice frantic. "Emily, come home now." I raced out of the office and sped through traffic, my heart hammering. When I pulled into the driveway, 2 unfamiliar men stood at the front door. They were tall, broad, their faces hard and cold. One of them held a piece of paper. "Are you his daughter?" the man asked flatly. My throat went dry. "Yes." He handed me the paper. "Tell your father this is his last warning. If he doesn't pay by Friday, we'll collect another way." And then they were gone, their car disappearing down the street. Mom rushed out of the house, her face pale. "What did they say?" I showed her the paper. Her hands shook as she read it. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's going to get us all killed." That night, I confronted Dad again. He was in the garage, his head bowed, his hands shaking. "They came here," I said, my voice cold. "They threatened us. Do you understand what that means? You didn't just gamble away money. You gambled away our safety." His eyes filled with tears. "Emily." "No," I shouted, my voice breaking. "Don't say my name like that." Don't act like you're the victim. You did this. You brought this into our lives. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just sat there, silent, broken. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in my life. Because for the first time, I was afraid, not of strangers, but of what my father's choices had brought to our doorstep. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room for disaster. Every creak of the floorboards, every knock on the door carrying the possibility of violence. After the men came, Mom stayed at Aunt Linda's permanently. She begged me to come with her, but some stubborn part of me refused to leave. I told myself it was because I didn't want to abandon Dad. But deep down, I think I just couldn't bear to watch him fall apart from a distance. If he was going to burn, I had to see it with my own eyes. 2 nights after the men showed up, I came downstairs around midnight and found Dad at the kitchen table. A single lamp lit the room, casting deep shadows across his face. He had stacks of papers spread out, bills, letters, gambling slips, bank statements. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but it crumbled instantly. Couldn't sleep, he asked. I shook my head. Neither could you. He stared down at the papers, his hands trembling. I don't know how to make it right, Emily. Tears stung my eyes. Then stop trying to fix it with more lies. Just admit what you've done. That's the only way forward. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no defensiveness, no denial, just raw regret. I never wanted you to see me like this. Broken. Weak. My throat tightened. I would have rather seen the truth than lived in your lies. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, he stood, gathering the papers into a messy pile. I need to do something, he muttered. I frowned. What do you mean? He didn't answer. He just walked out the door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, waiting, dread clawing at my chest. At dawn, I heard the door creak open. Dad stumbled inside, his clothes wrinkled, his face drawn and pale. What did you do? I whispered. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I sold everything I could. The watch your grandfather gave me. My tools. Even the last of Mom's jewelry. His voice cracked. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. I stared at him, my heart breaking. He had traded every piece of himself away, and still, it hadn't fixed anything. 2 days later, the men came back. I was home alone when the knock rattled the door. My heart raced as I opened it to find the same 2 men standing there. Your dad, one of them asked. He's not here, I said quickly. The taller one smirked. Tell him time's up. He shoved an envelope into my hands and walked away. Inside was a single line, we collect tonight. I called Mom, panicked. She arrived within 20 minutes, her face pale as I showed her the note. We can't stay here, she said firmly. Pack a bag. By the time Dad returned, the house was half empty. Mom had already thrown clothes and essentials into suitcases. What's going on? Dad demanded, his eyes wide. They're coming tonight, I said, my voice shaking. We're leaving. He shook his head. No. I'll face them. Mom's voice cracked. Tom, if you stay, you'll get yourself killed. He stood tall for the first time in weeks, his jaw clenched. Then let them take me. I deserve it. Tears spilled down my cheeks. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to drag us down with you anymore. For a moment, we all just stood there, the weight of decades pressing down on us. Then Dad lowered his head. Go. I'll handle it. We left that night. I'll never forget the image of him standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the porch light, watching us drive away. I never saw him in that house again. The next morning, Mom got a call. Dad had been taken to the hospital. A fight had broken out. Details were scarce, but it was clear he'd confronted the men, and it had ended badly. He survived, but he was battered, broken, and finally, stripped of all his denial. In the sterile white hospital room, I sat by his bed, holding his hand. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his face bruised, his body frail. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice hoarse. For everything. For the lies. For the danger. For failing you. Tears blurred my vision.
You didn't just fail me, Dad.
You failed yourself. He nodded weakly. I know. That was the first time I believed him. The weeks that followed were slow and painful. Mom filed for divorce, this time without hesitation. Dad entered a recovery program for gambling addicts, though it was hard to tell if it was for himself or because he had nothing left to lose.
I visited him sometimes.
Part of me hated him still, but another part pitied him. He was no longer the pillar of my childhood. He was just a man, flawed and fragile. And me? I realized something important. I couldn't rebuild him, but I could rebuild myself. I moved out of the house permanently into a small apartment closer to work. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I filled it with light. Plants by the windows, photos of friends on the walls, books stacked in corners. It became a sanctuary, a place untouched by lies. One evening, I sat on my balcony, the city humming softly around me, and thought back to that night at the restaurant. The waiter's whisper, Dad's face turning white. At the time, I thought it was just a moment of embarrassment. I had no idea it was the first domino falling in a chain of betrayals that would shatter everything. But here's the truth I learned. Sometimes the collapse is what saves you. Because losing my father as I knew him forced me to find myself. He may never fully recover, and our relationship may never be whole. But I am no longer the girl sitting at that restaurant table, hoping her dad will always have the answers. I am the woman who survived the lies. And I'll never let anyone gamble with my life again.